Hello and welcome back to Mining Stock Daily with me, Paul Harris. Today we're talking about nickel exploration in Canada, and I have great pleasure to be joined by Jason Jessup, CEO of Magna Mining, has put out a PEA today on its Crean Hill deposit near Sudbury in Ontario. Good afternoon, Jason.
Hey Paul, how are you doing?
I am very well, thank you. I imagine you're doing very well. A very interesting PEA today, some very good numbers in there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. So, this is was 8 months in the making. This PEA is based on the resource that we announced last November on Crean Hill. So it doesn't incorporate any of the drilling that we've done since then. But yeah, it is, it is turned out very, very well. It incorporates both open pit and underground mining. And the base case is toll milling or selling, we'll call it ore, but really mineralized resource in the PEA through a third-party existing mill here in Sudbury. So that is the base case, and then we also examined an alternative processing scenario where the mineable resource would be sold to basically Ursa Major and the Shakespeare project. So we didn't incorporate any of the capital costs on building Shakespeare, but just saying if we were to build Shakespeare and process Crean Hill through that, what would the economics look like? So we looked at both scenarios, and both scenarios were quite robust.
Okay, thank you, Jason. To put some numbers on that, the base case, 20.1 million tonnes of ore for 15 years, or mineralised material for 15 years, which includes nickel, copper, cobalt, platinum, palladium and gold. That base case generates an after-tax net present value of $230.4 million and an 8% discount rate with an internal rate of return of 23.4%. The alternative processing case Jason mentioned would be for 28.2 million tonnes over 19 years, and that after-tax NPV would jump to 516 million and the IRR would go up over 38%. I imagine given that increase with the alternative scenario, Jason, you'd be quite interested in sending that mineralised material to Shakespeare rather than a third party.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. It is I think it really demonstrates the synergies that we've always talked about between our Shakespeare project and Crean Hill. And it definitely, makes a very strong case to continue with further technical studies. And one of the recommendations of the PEA is a pre-feasibility study to fully integrate Shakespeare and Crean Hill and look at that combined as one complex.
Okay, so if you're going ahead with that sort of PFS to combine both of those, what's the potential timeline there? What are the main work elements you need to do to be able to integrate both of those?
So there's some metallurgical work that needs to be done. So we'll have to look at when we blend the two call them ores together. What kind of concentrates will be produced? How much concentrate? How does that fit into the mill at Shakespeare? Is there some opportunities to get some better recoveries than what we've shown just with Shakespeare alone, and we believe there is that kind of potential, especially for some of the precious metals. As well, we would want to look at what do we do with the additional tailings, adding in the type of numbers that we've talked about in the PEA over a life of mine combined with Shakespeare could make for a very long life operation, and so we'll look at the tailings in the co-disposal area as well. But overall, I think it's something that we can get accomplished before the end of 2024. So looking at sort of Q4 2024 for a timeline. Some of the initial test work, the metallurgical test work, we have started that. We haven't awarded the PFS to any group yet, but that's something we'll be looking at once we have some more of our internal engineering done.
Okay, and will that PFS be the focus of work effort by Magna sort of going forward over the range of this year and into next year?
It's going to be one of our focus for sure. We're still looking at de-risking the project further through advanced exploration and bulk sampling and test mining. So we are looking at starting that in Q4 of this year, so very, very soon, in the next sort of 3 months, to take a surface bulk sample from the 109 zone at Crean Hill, ship that to a third-party mill and be able to reconcile against that block model and kind of demonstrate what potentially we could be mining in that 109 area at depth. As well, we're looking at a underground ramp starting from surface with a new portal, driving underground ramp, and then test mining areas of the 109, the intermediate contact zone, as well as the 101 footwall zone, down to depths of about the 550 foot level. And that's discussed in the PEA as part of our advanced exploration program, and we think it's a logical next step in de-risking the project, and that'll also feed into future PFS.
Okay. Now, given the suite of minerals that you have there, I imagine you're getting or starting to get some inbound interest for companies that potentially might like to help you along that path towards development. How is that going? How is the sort of corporate side going?
Well, we're definitely getting lots of inbound discussions from various groups. I would say right now nickel is probably the hottest commodity we have in our suite of metals. So quite a bit of interest in strategic investors, OEMs, and others who might like a nickel offtake in return for that, providing some upfront cash and or other forms of project financing. So that is those discussions are still ongoing, and they could help us even with some of the advanced exploration plans that we have. But yeah, lots of inbounds, lots of discussions. We think we're in a pretty good spot right now.
Okay, that sort of leads nicely into sort of my next question about the sort of financial position, capital markets. What's the cash position of the company? When do you envisage you will need to raise money again?
Yeah, so we, as of our last financial statements, end of Q1 that we reported, we're just over $20 million in the treasury. We've done some exploration, so there's been some burn since then. But generally we're in a pretty solid cash position to execute, our exploration, our drilling for the remainder of this year and next year, as well as all of our hard dollar needs and for G&A. As far as going and doing any of the underground advanced exploration, we have a few options next year on how we would fund that, but that's probably the logical time to do another financing sometime next year.
Okay, I was going to ask you if the 20 million, if that's enough to take you through the pre-feasibility. It sounds like it may be, but with the underground exploration, you need a bit some additional finance.
Yeah, and part of what we'll be doing as well, and we're working through, is more sort of detailed planning for our advanced exploration, where exactly we'd like to go in and do some test mining, and then once we have a better understanding, and as our assays are coming back from some of our drilling, especially in the 101 zone, we're getting a much better understanding, and I think we've demonstrated this in a few of our press releases, talking about the 109 especially, where the drilling we've done doesn't really coincide with what the block model is telling us, and often the drill results have been much better than what the block model is estimating it at. We think this could be the case in other parts of the deposit as well. So this is going to be important to test some of these areas, and depending on the grades, we might be pleasantly surprised with some of the revenues that it potentially generate. So we're putting that all together so we have a true understanding of what the capital requirements might be for advanced exploration.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Now the base case you mentioned features sending mineralized material to a third party. Presumably they've got a mill that's up and running and doing all of that. As you go forward, are they potentially one of the parties that could potentially be a strategic investor or otherwise for the company as you seek to sort of go forward?
Yeah, and I can't say too much about those discussions, but there's of course potential. Yes, there are two mills operating in Sudbury, one by Vale, one by Glencore. We have great relationships with both of these companies. So how they're planning to fill their mills long term, we may be a part of that process, and judging by what we've shown in the PEA and the production profile, if we proceed forward with both an open pit and underground simultaneously, the amount of feed that we could potentially produce, as outlined in the PEA, could be over 2 million tons per year. So with a 4,500 ton per day or a 1.6 million ton per year permits for a mill at Shakespeare, there may be an opportunity to do something long term, even if we do build or when we do build the Shakespeare mill. So, long short answer, I can't say too much about that, but there's always that potential.
Well, I have to ask. I'd imagine you're looking on with a lot of interest at some of the recent developments. Valley announced last week that it's going to sell a 10% share in its base metals business. I think that was to Ma'aden of Saudi Arabia. Today, Glencore's buying the other sort of 46% of the Mara copper project in Argentina. It doesn't already own. How much copper does your project have?
Yeah, so it produces a significant amount of copper. Just over approximately 300 million pounds over life of mine as per the PEA. But it is, I would say copper is sort of, right next to nickel in production. So it's quite significant.
Well, that seems to be something that a lot of the big guys are very anxious to get more exposure to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're very bullish on copper as well. Obviously, nickel is first and foremost, but because, the polymetallic nature, and we believe that with electrification and all the infrastructure is going to be required for that, copper is going to be a big winner in that move too.
Okay, looking further ahead maybe, let's talk a little bit about permitting. You're on a brownfield site, so it's perhaps not as complicated as it would be if you were a greenfield development. What's the permitting sort of outlook for you and potential timeline?
So to get sort of start at the beginning, what we're looking at doing next year, the advanced exploration, it's very straightforward. There's already a closure plan in place on Crean Hill. Water from the site is currently being treated at a water treatment plant just off site. So we would be utilizing that same water treatment plant. We would be just amending the closure plan to allow us to make some additional disturbance on surface, but we'd have a very small footprint with what we're planning. We expect to have those permits in place by the end of the year. So they're well underway. Now looking at sort of how do we transition from that into commercial production. Again, from underground, it's relatively small impact, and again, it just becomes an amendment to the closure plan. Where it might become a little bit more permitting work is for the open pit, because it will generate considerable amount of waste rock. So looking at where we store that waste rock long term, and how do we treat any water runoff from that, requires some studies to be done. But yeah, from an underground mining perspective, to get started with that component, we think we're going to have the permitting in place to start in Q1 of 2024, and we think that to continue on with that is a fairly straightforward permitting process. Just the open pit may take a year or two to get that all permitted, with some additional studies required.
Okay, thank you, Jason. PEA obviously is a very big landmark to achieve. What can we expect to see from the company by the remainder of the year, from now until the end of the year?
Well, I guess from a news perspective, we've done almost about 14,000 meters of drilling at Crean Hill this year. There were some delays in getting assay results. I would say in Q2, they seem to be resolved at the assay lab, so we see quite a few assay results coming in. So I would expect pretty steady news flow as we catch up on a lot of the drill holes. We've reported, and I can't remember exactly, but approximately 25 holes in total at Crean Hill, and I think we're drilling around number 50, so there's about 25 holes outstanding. So there should be fairly steady news flow. A lot of that is going to be drilling, some additional drilling around the deep part of the 109 footwall, some additional definition infill drilling, and I guess drilling to understand the 101 footwall zone, as well as the 105, which is a new zone in between the 101 and 109. So quite a bit of drill results will be coming out over the coming weeks as we catch up on that. As well, we want to keep our investors and the people up to speed on how things are progressing as far as the permitting. So we hope as things start, news starts coming back on that, we'll be able to report that, and I think going to be quite positive. And sometime in Q4, we'd want to conduct the bulk sample on surface in the 109 area that we had done some short hole drill program back in Q2, and that'd be looking at about a 15,000 ton surface sample that would be shipped off site. And with that, we're working on getting definitive terms for a ore selling agreement with one of the mills here in Sudbury. So again, lots of news on that as those progress, but I think it'll be an exciting second half of the year, as it's already starting out to be.
Busy times indeed. Magna Mining trades on the TSXV under NICU and on the OTCQB under MGMNF. Jason Jessup, CEO, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Paul.
And that's all from me, Paul Harris. Stay tuned for more from Mining Stock Daily.